feature presentation.
It is fun to like talk about those things about, talking to people that have seen the show because you're, so involved in it from an early process. Has there been anything that stood out to you in terms of having conversations with, journalists and interviewers that have, really kind of defined your character, Paul Baker, or something that maybe didn't stand out when you were playing the role?
I think something I've found really exciting is that a lot of people, friends and journalists as well, have been saying it's a lot more like it goes there much more than they were expecting. I had a friend come up and he was like, I don't know what at the premiere. He's like, I don't know how else to describe this. It's not the best word, but like it's a little edgier than I thought. There's a little bit of a they go for it, and I was like, oh, I love that. I love that people maybe weren't expecting that because we also come out the gate pretty hard. I feel like on what the show is, and I love that people are enjoying it.
Yeah, sometimes you have to hit the ground running to really establish yourself because you're competing against all these other shows as well, right? And content is king in this day and age. I wanted to ask you about Paul Baker because he's such a happy-go-lucky character and a very nice person. Do you think that he has any anxiety in wanting to be a part of this group, especially because he feels at some points like a little bit of the outsider coming in?
Totally. I think that's like the most relatable thing I found with him, where I think on the outside, he's so go with the flow. He's now part of this group, and he's introduced as he's his boyfriend, but then is wanting to be a part of this. And I don't think that's shown. I do think there's a little part of it where it means a lot to him. And I think externally, Paul's just there. He's down for anything. But I think you almost see with like in the gun episode where they're trying to figure out what to do with the gun. He's like, he says to Sammy, he's like, I'll go with you if you want. There's a little bit of I think sweet desperation of like, can I come? Is it cool if I come? Which I love in Paul.
Well, even when Paul is interacting with Anton at the hospital and, they're playing, their version of The Pit or ER, and like, Paul is so giving to Anton in that moment, and you can kind of feel that sweetness. You mentioned the gun episode. There's a really great bit where Anton is messaging you and it comes up as gum instead of gun. And I was thinking I wanted to ask you what your thoughts are on how media, specifically tech, is portrayed in film and television. Is that something that you're aware of as an actor playing a role, interacting with a prop that is a laptop or an iPhone or a computer?
Totally. I think that's like a Gen Z almost like bone to pick with media. If you have, I think even from like the Zoe 101 days where it's like they have like the pair computers, that's something that I think I take note of. I'm like, how realistic is this? What iOS are they using? And I thought the show did it really well with the text coming up. I love that in shows. That was a personal thing where I watched and I was like, yes, I'm glad we did that, because when there's like weird UIs, that can sometimes throw me off. And I shout out to our editors who did that well.
Was there something that you felt like you were nervous about in terms of engaging with a particular piece of equipment? Because there's a bit where you have a laptop in your hand in the basement, and I believe that was when executive producer Nick Kroll was on set as well, right?
I wasn't nervous about that. I just remember being nervous. Kroll was throwing out funny one-liners for me to say, and that was my only nerves because there was also a real video we had to keep playing. So I wasn't nervous about that. I remember just being like, I hope I can nail my line, because Kroll kept making me laugh with the jokes that he was saying. And I was like, I messed that up.
Well, it works. There's something I was really kind of fascinated by with your character. And, there's an element of him being an individual, and obviously Paul Baker always being mentioned as Paul Baker, but you're also a part of an ensemble. Do you think about the individual and, working against fellow actors in a show that is very much about the group in a different way than maybe you have in the past as an actor?
Yeah, I think it's never against in my mind. It's like, I think it's just, how can we talked about that? Like when it's someone else's coverage or this is a funny Anton bit, what can I do, like when it's not my coverage or even in my coverage, to lay that up? Like, how can we support each other? And that was the most fun. My favorite scenes of the film was when it was all five of us and we could just it was someone's joke to come up and we're all kind of setting it up. I found that even more fun than like it being my punchline. It's just, how can we best support so-and-so to do their best bit? So that was, it's totally different. Like it's totally a team sport when you're out there.
Absolutely. Do you think a show like this could be actually set in Canada, in Toronto? Because obviously there are a lot of locations that I think people will recognize that are in Toronto or live in Canada or Ontario, or even seeing line producer Alex Jordan pop up, things like that.
Yeah.
Do you think a show like this could actually be made here?
For sure. I think also, I wonder, I think there's a TTC streetcar that goes by in one scene. And I'm curious people will point that out. But I think could be anywhere. Like, I think the beauty of the show is that it's just anyone in their 20s or at any age trying to live their life, trying to be a good friend, trying to get a job, trying to be whatever. I think the whole show is just about what it means to try as an adult. So I think that can be anywhere, especially here. Like my upbringing and my 20s here in Toronto are very much like the show. Like, I think it's just universal in a really beautiful way.
And does that help you get into character as much as, say, like, there was this great behind the scenes documentary about John Wick called Wick is Pain, and they were talking about how Keanu was about to shave the beard because some producers didn't want that. Do you think about wardrobe and facial hair and things like that in terms of getting into characters?
Totally.
Paul Baker.
Yeah, I had a there's a tattoo, there's a smiley face on my hand, and I had a couple tattoos that I don't have in real life. And whenever that tattoo went on, I was like, oh, I'm Paul. Like, I'm locked into, I'm no longer Jack. And I remember Lucy said that one time. She was like, when you step out in your little crop shirt and the charm belt and you have that tattoo on your hand, like, you're Paul. You walk out, you're a different man on set, which is fun.
There's an episode, Roast Chicken, and the escalation in that episode and the anxiety in that episode is very similar to a Safdie Brothers movie. Obviously, Julia Fox has a guest starring role in this. Was that something that you were talking about or felt as you were making it, or was that in discussion in reference point?
In the like to Uncut Gems, or
Yeah,
or to the I don't know. I wasn't in the behind the scenes conversations, but I know the Thanksgiving dinner from the Bear was brought. That was my first thing. I was like, oh, this is our version of that on a tamer level, where, like, this is going to be explosive in an emotional way and explosive a little bit from Charlie Cox's way too, like with his performance. But that's a good shout out. I'm going to say yes, actually. Yes, we tried to make it Safdie Brothers.
Yes. Well, it feels like there's this escalation, and the one release you have is when characters are screaming into the oven, and it's like that's the one moment that the audience is, screaming with you or interacting with you and relating to you. Yeah. You mentioned trying, and I think, like, that's an important thing in putting yourself out there. How important is it for you as a comedian and an actor to really, give it your all, but also to, be that team player within this ensemble?
Yeah. Everything. Like, that's, trying. I think that's a hard thing, especially, like, we're all, other people have done some roles. Like, this was my first major role. And so I think it could have been really intimidating trying to be like, oh, I want to be my best, but it was more so like, how can we be be our best? Sorry, I feel like I didn't really answer that well. That's like,
no, I feel like it's one of those things where it's like having a conversation about putting yourself out there and trying to, do the best thing you can, because, in this field, it's really difficult to set yourself apart from, you mentioned The Bear, like, there's so many shows and so many films out there to compete against, and Adults is one of many. So having a great performance like you give as Paul Baker, I think, is really important to that. We were talking about technology earlier, and there's a great bit in this show where Samir has a job interview via Zoom. Has that changed your approach to acting at all, and specifically the audition process? Because you also did mention that when you were shooting The Office Movers, that you were shooting up until, like, I think midnight, and then you had to go to New York the next day.
Yeah. It definitely inspired me to show my ass more on Zooms. That was a big thing. I was like mooning, and then I read the script. I was like, oh, I probably shouldn't do that. I actually was very thankful that I was shooting The Office Movers before, because it made me nice and tired, because otherwise I would have gone in too shaky, and I was very thankful for that, and also thankful for the Office Movers. Sorry, I feel like I lost what the question was in that.
Well, just asking if it's changed your approach in terms of auditioning or even acting, as you're acting on a Zoom call. It seems almost nerve-wracking.
Oh, it totally is. I hate when, like, watching it clock down, and I run to my whole team, like, anyone I work with knows, I go to the bathroom right before I go. I pee 17 million times a day, and I'm like, okay, it's like 2:29, I pee, and then I come back, and then I'm sitting. Versus when we did the chem read in New York, it was so much more like you're kind of just sitting around for. I think it was like 6-hour window, and I only went in like 2 or 3 times. So most of the time we're just sitting around eating snacks, and I like that a lot more. Zoom auditions, that's tough.
I mean, the snacks are always great as well.
Love it.
Last question. For season 2, what do you hope to explore further with Paul Baker as a character and as a person?
Yeah, I think I'm excited to see how. I'm excited for the whole, the entire kind of cast of characters to see how they explore romantically, because I think that there's a lot of. I think we only really saw that in Billy and Samir. And I'm excited to see Anton explore that. I'm excited to see kind of just how the rest of everyone, like the Issa-Paul relationship, how that develops. Because have you seen the whole?
I've seen up to episode 6.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, there's some. I won't spoil anything, but there's some interesting stuff at the end. And I'm just curious to. I'm curious to see how the romance aspect goes.
Nice. Well, Jack, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it, man.
Thank you so much for having me.